right, we are here looking at chapter 14. We're talking about worker safety under the broad umbrella of risk management. So let's get into it. So number one, just a definition: risk management involves the responsibility to consider physical, human, and financial factors protecting organizational and individual interests. Kind of a broad term, but it's broad on purpose because there's a lot of stuff that kind of fits onto it, from wellness programs to health promotion, to safety, to OSHA, ADA, etc. So let's unpack some of it. First, a little bit of data. So 1 in 4 employees report being harassed or threatened or attacked at work. 25%, 2 million crimes committed at work each year. That shouldn't shock us if people spend 40 or 50 hours a week at work. 16% of assaults, and this one's kind of weird, workplace homicide victims are 80% male, which means if someone's going to kill somebody at work, 80% of the time the person they kill is a man. However, it is the leading cause of occupational death among women. So if you are a woman and you die at work, the number one way that you die is somebody kills you, and that's pretty freaking weird. So why do we look at stuff like this? We look for trends. We look for propensities from a kind of a director level or an HR perspective. So most common jobs experiencing homicide: cab drivers, security guards. You can read it. So when we see stuff like this, that's when we pause and we go, okay, what's the theme, or what do we have in common? So in this case, you may look at it and go, well, those seem kind of obscure, but they have two things in common. Number one, they're open to the public. Number two, they're open at night. So whenever we see those kinds of trends, we go, okay, that's interesting. Do I have anything in my firm? For instance, this would be just an example that's open to the public and open at night. And then we take different kinds of precautions. That's what I mean by kind of an environmental scan to see what does the data say, what are the trajectories, what are the propensities, and then what do we need to do about it from a health perspective. So 3 main areas that we talk about in risk management. One of them is health, and then safety, and then security. So health is a general state of physical, mental, and emotional well-being. It's very broad. It's very broad on purpose. And we'll get to a law here in a little bit called OSHA, where there's a thing called the General Duty Clause, which means, in general, organizations have the duty or the responsibility to make sure that their employees are in a safe and healthy work environment. So very broad. Number 2, safety. That's when we're really looking at physical stuff. We start to take a look at personal protective equipment, how we're training people to use machines, stuff like that. And then security. Security is becoming even more broad with the threat of cyber terrorism. So people aren't breaking in, people still break into organizations, but a new way to break in, obviously, is through cyber threats. So big legal concerns. When we look at this at kind of a base level of kind of taking care of our business, we have workers' compensation. If you get hurt on the job, you get money till you get back on your feet. Americans with Disabilities Act. We'll look at this a little bit. This is when somebody gets, we usually think about this in terms of, hey, don't discriminate against somebody who has a disability. Yes, that's true, but what happens as related to safety is people get hurt and actually become disabled on the job. So what do we do in that situation? Child labor laws, we'll look at that. Different types of civil rights laws, and a little bit, very little bit on collective bargaining, which is unions. So first, the ADA. One thing this is a common mistake that people do is you have an employee and they're good and they get hurt and you want to bring them back to work. And so people have heard of this term called light duty. Can they return to work light duty? So we return people to work often because they want to, and even if they're not quite ready, and we say, well, we'll kind of ease them into it as they get healthy. One of the challenges with that is we undercut what are called the essential job functions in the job. And that is, you have to do these 3 or 4 kind of main things. Think 20% or more on average. These are main chunks of the job. So if I got hurt on the job and I couldn't talk, you might say, oh, well, we'll bring him back to work as a professor. But the challenge is, can he still do the job? You know, someone can get hurt and disabled and they're no longer qualified to do the job. So we got to not return people to work until they can at least do the essential job functions on the job. Regarding child labor law, there's a type of work called hazardous work. It's coded by the Department of Labor, mining, railway, stuff like that. and you have to be 18 years old or older to do it, stuff like that. So there is breakdowns, but I want you to hold this loosely because each state, Washington State specifically, but each state has their own child labor laws, things that people can and can't do at certain ages. This is kind of general at kind of a federal or overall level. In general, when you're 16, you can start working. If you're certain hours a day, especially during school time, 14 and 15 is very limited. Okay, legal issues regarding work assignment. So a couple things on this. One of them, obviously, you can see reproductive health. So if a woman is pregnant and works in, we had a case that was in the paint hanger at Boeing, and says, I don't want to do this job right now. I'm concerned for whatever it is, baby, birth defects. Number one, that is on us as a company to be concerned about reproductive health. Now, that doesn't mean we go around to everybody and say, hey, are you pregnant? Do you have plans to get pregnant? But make accommodations when we know or should have known. But the second point there is pretty important, that if employees feel like the work is unsafe, they can actually refuse to do it. I was on a consulting project recently where somebody was hanging by cables down in a hole, and the person is like, no, like I don't trust that person because of some things that they had learned about him to hold me on those cables to operate the equipment, so I'm not going to do it. And the organization has to respect and honor that and make it safe. Doesn't mean they have to do whatever the employee wants, but they just have to make sure that it is in fact safe. And this falls under a very broad law, came around in 1970, called the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which is overseen by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So it's not kind of a trick question if someone says, what does OSHA stand for? Well, it's got two. One of them is the Act, and the other one is the administration that oversees the Act. So it's very broad in its scope. So basically, OSHA, the administration, enforces the safety regulations that are in the Act. There's a lot of components to it. We'll look at a few of them, but the big idea is probably the general duty clause, which means whatever it is, service, manufacturing, no matter where you are, employers have a responsibility to make sure it's a safe and healthy work environment. This is some data since 2004, specifically workplace fatalities, and people might point to this and say, hey, look, OSHA is actually working. We are making the workplace more safer. You can see there was a big drop there up to 2008, 2009. It kind of leveled out. This is OSHA is also, it's kind of weird, but it's related to unions and union laws as well. In that unions are usually, they have a heavier presence in the manufacturing sector, where you're more likely to see accidents, certainly workplace fatalities, and people would argue maybe there's less of a need for unions now because of laws like this, because of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which is put in there for workers. So what does OSHA cover? It's got a few things. Number one of them is how they enforce their laws, which can include inspections, surprise visits even. Another one is hazard communication. If you're ever walking down the hall, somebody mopped the floor and there's a sign up, that says caution, floor is wet. That's an OSHA issue. Or instructions next to a fire extinguisher. That's an OSHA issue. You have to communicate where there's a potential hazard. Bloodborne pathogens, gloves, masks, stuff like that. Basically a way to respond in case of an accident to minimize the risk of bloodborne pathogens. The next one is personal protective equipment. There's different, I've got a video link there, but there's different things on this. But this is when you think of, my mind goes to a construction site, someone wearing a hard hat or steel-toe boots or gloves, or if somebody is working with wood, they're going to use eye protection, stuff like that. So those are the things that say, you have to wear these to protect you. It sounds maybe odd, but a lot of workers often will say, well, I don't want to. It's inconvenient to wear the goggles. They fog up, or inconvenient to wear the gloves because I can't, pick up things that I want to pick up, small, kind of fine things. Again, it's on us. If we train someone and we tell them about personal protective equipment, make it available to them, and they don't do it, and they get injured, that still comes back to us as the organization, both. There's a moral component there. Somebody got hurt, but also a legal component. And pandemic guidelines. What do we do with things like coronavirus or SARS or whatever when it's going out? So OSHA has has this concept of recordability, and it produces what's called the incident rate. So how many people do you have? How many incidents have you had per year? And it's kind of a weird game that safety managers feel like they have to play, and that is, if I record all my cases, my incident rate goes really high and it looks like it's an unsafe work environment. If I don't record the cases, I'm in violation of OSHA and could get fined or worse. So this is just kind of a guide to know when you need to record. When I say record a case, I mean, like, here's what happened. Here was the accident. We did a root cause analysis and we found out this was the issue, and then these are the changes that we made, training, equipment, whatever, to try to prevent that accident from happening again. So that's what I mean by when you record a case. You just document that it happened, and kind of what the cause was and what you did about it. So if somebody dies at work, you're going to have to write that down, right? I think we got that. If somebody gets sick at work because of something at work, you're going to have to write that down. If somebody blows out their ACL playing flag football on the weekend and they limp into work on crutches, you don't have to write that down. It wasn't a workplace issue. Most of the complexity revolves around when someone gets hurt at work, kind of how bad is it before we have to document it. So if they have to transfer to another job, they lose consciousness, restriction of motion, something like that, you got to document those. Medical treatment, stitches, something like that, you document those. If it's like I got a paper cut, you don't have to document that. If no first aid was done, you don't have to document that. For the most part, like, when in doubt, write it down, root cause analysis, figure out what happened, and figure out